Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to my next Deep Purple video where today I will be discussing the first half of Mark II in the 70s. My last video on Mark I was way longer than I thought it was going to be. It felt like I was talking for maybe 20, 30 minutes, but it turned out to be almost an hour. And given that there's probably a lot to talk about with Mark II, I figured I'd probably just kind of split this chapter of the band's history into two videos to make it a little bit more reasonable and a little more manageable. So the albums I'll be chatting about in this video are the Concerto for Group and Orchestra, Deep Purple in Rock, of course, and a personal favorite of mine, Fireball. Oh yes, this is a great album. So yeah, Deep Purple Mark II. What can be said? Obviously this is far and away the most successful, most renowned, most well-known version of Deep Purple. If you bring up Deep Purple in conversation with music people, this is the version of the band that immediately comes to mind. Of course, we've got the core members with Ritchie Blackmore on guitar, John Lord on organ, Ian Pace on drums, with the addition of Ian Gillan on vocals and Roger Glover on bass. And what a band! This is the period in the band's history where they really trailblaze the development of this hard rock, turning into metal music. This is the period of the band that ensures that they're amongst the big three of the early hard rock bands. So this kind of puts them in the same categories as a Led Zeppelin or a Black Sabbath. I mentioned in the first kind of Deep Purple intro video, like it's definitely worth noting that of those three bands, Deep Purple has the least amount of cultural impact or significance. If you compare them to Zeppelin or Sabbath. My argument is that they were probably the best band of those three. They operated as the strongest unit. They probably had the best players on a technical level. And from what I would imagine, they were probably the most exciting band to see live back in the day. You just never knew it was going to happen. Their live shows were absolutely off the wall. They were crazy. Same with the other bands as well. But I think Purple had an edge there in terms of the way they improvised and the way that the way that there was this unpredictable nature as to what was going to happen at a Purple show. But yeah, and it's interesting to note too when you compare them to Zeppelin and Sabbath. The Mark II version of the band is the version that you can immediately compare to those bands. This is the version that would be in that big three, but very very short lived. It's only about 4 years that the band exists in this incarnation. It's really from May of '69 to kind of spring summer of '73. You compare that to Zeppelin and Sabbath. I mean, Zeppelin and Sabbath both have about 10 years of consistent touring and recording with the same lineup before it breaks down. Obviously, in Zeppelin's case, when John Bonham passed away, they just disbanded. But even Sabbath had damn close to 10 years with Ozzy before Dio comes in, and then the Sabbath lineup starts going really crazy for a little while, and they kind of go on their own little tangent. But yeah, two bands with about 10 years, and then Deep Purple is only the 4 years with the classic Mark II lineup. So that's kind of interesting and of note, I suppose. But yeah, I suppose we'll carry on with where I left off in the Mark I video. And I should include this just so it's a part of the whole video series. I forgot to mention the last single that was released by Mark I, which of course is Emeretta. This is recorded during the same sessions that the self-titled Deep Purple album comes out, or recorded during those same sessions. And yeah, it's an all right song. It kind of fits the bill with some of the kind of funkier, groovier songs on the Deep Purple album. So I guess you can kind of compare it to like The Painter or Why Didn't Rosemary or one of those songs. It's all right. It's groovy little number. It's kind of got some silly lyrics. Like Rod Evans, it's like pleading love song to some actress or something. I'm not too sure, but yeah, it's okay. That's the last single that Mark I ever releases. So yeah, they finished recording the self-titled album with Rod Evans and Nick Simper around March of '69. And I think it's right around this time that they've determined that they're going to need a new lead singer to pursue this sort of heavier direction that in particular Richie Blackmore is very keen to pursue. I was listening to the Deep Purple podcast not too long ago. Very, very great podcast. Totally recommend checking those guys out. They actually had an interview with Nick Simper recently, and Nick Simper kind of implies that he and Blackmore were kind of in cahoots with this, pushing this heavier direction. Obviously, early '69 is when the first Zeppelin album came out, and I think that would have had a huge impact on everybody. But this is what kind of really lit the fire under Blackmore's pants, so to speak, where he said, "No, we need to get heavy." Not only because he enjoyed playing that kind of style of music, but I think he also saw the commercial potential of it. So yeah, they know they need a new lead singer to pursue this direction. They start looking around. Somebody recommends they check out a band called Episode 6, who's got Ian Gillan on vocals and Roger Glover on bass. They go there. Obviously, Gillan would have blown their minds. He's a tremendous singer, especially around this time. He's in his prime. His voice is very, very good. And the way that it's kind of set up, this is kind of interesting. There's actually sort of an overlapping period where Mark 1 and Mark 2 kind of exist simultaneously. They're so enamored with Gillan that they say, okay, come on, let's do a session. We're going to record a new single. This is in June of '69, while Mark 1 is still finishing touring commitments. The last Mark 1 show, I believe, is July 4th of 1969. So a month before the last Mark 1 show, the first Mark 2 recordings actually comes out. Nick Simper was not invited to be a part of this single. Roger Glover comes by, and I kind of get the idea that, Gillan is the one that invites Roger along. This, obviously they're, Gillan and Glover are good buddies. They're songwriting partners. So Glover comes along. Although on the single, he's only credited as a session musician, which is kind of interesting. I think Gillan is kind of regarded as having, full band status at this point, but it's all very murky because, like I said, Mark 1 is technically still existing at this point while they record this single. And the single in question, I haven't even said the name yet, is Hallelujah, a word I've always had great difficulty in pronouncing. And it's the song itself is a very interesting little artifact. It's unlike anything else done by this version of the band. It's the closest we get to Mark II doing like a Mark I sort of a song. It's I wouldn't call it, it's not like a Lelania or anything like that. It's a little bit more heavy than that. Still very organ heavy. The guitar isn't necessarily distorted or anything like that, but I kind of get the idea. It's sort of like a moody ballad, but it's got some of those Mark II elements. I mean, we got a couple of screams from Gillan, which is really good. Gillan's voice on it is fantastic. Like I said, he's really in the prime of his, his voice is in its prime at this time. You can really appreciate how rich the natural tone of his voice is on Hallelujah. Yeah, great song. It's funny. There's a part in that piece. It's kind of like the pre-chorus where Blackmore, he's doing arpeggios on this particular chord, and for whatever reason, it almost reminds me of Omar Rodriguez Lopez from the Mars Volta. I'm sure that's a coincidence. Like, I know Omar is he's into a lot of obscure stuff. Whether Hallelujah by Deep Purple had any influence on him, it's hard to say, but yeah, quite interesting. I should say it's a cover. I couldn't tell you who did the original version, and it's not that version of Hallelujah. Not the Leonard Cohen version. I got that name right, hopefully. But yeah, the B-side was the instrumental section of April. And I think the single must have come out after the last Mark I show. It had to have, but nonetheless, it sank without a trace. They even recorded a video for it, and didn't really do anything. But many years on, it's a very interesting little artifact in Deep Purple history. So yeah, obviously the band is established by July of '69. Roger Glover, shortly after the session, wants to be a part of the band. So unfortunately, Nick Simper is out. He kind of gets a bit of a raw deal there, but Roger Glover is the Deep Purple bass player that we all know and love. Obviously, Simper's he's there at the start, and Glenn Hughes contributes some great stuff. But when you think of Deep Purple, obviously Roger Glover's the bass player. So it had to happen that way, unfortunately. But yeah, July of '69, they get together at the Hanwell Community Center. It's somewhere, I would assume it's in London. It's in the UK in any case. And right away they begin to develop this new extra heavy, very aggressive, sort of Zeppelin inspired sound. And, I can only imagine that it would have been an exciting moment for the band themselves. They also begin touring right away. They spend a lot more time focusing on the UK because obviously Mark One, probably like 80% of its touring life was spent in the States because they had the hit with Hush. But once Gillan and Glover in the band, they do start to focus a little bit more on the UK and Europe. So over the course of that summer, they're developing this cool new sound. Everything is, obviously very exciting. But there's one thing that must be done, and that is, of course, the Concerto for Group and Orchestra. And this is a very strange little moment in the band's history, honestly. In some senses, because they were already developing the material that would eventually become in rock, it almost feels like this is like sort of a thing that's sort of standing in their way. I'm not sure when this would have been planned out or booked. I'm sure it was written throughout most of the Mark One period, but in any case, this is very much John Lord's baby. I almost see this project as being it's kind of there's two ways of looking at it. In one sense, it almost feels like this is kind of the natural conclusion of Mark One. So of course, this is a full blown concerto with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, written by John Lord, and it's the whole concept is integrating the orchestra with the modern rock band. Um, Totally lost my train of thought there, but I'll get it back here in a sec. Yeah, that's what I was saying. In some senses, this does feel like a natural continuation of what Mark One was going towards, because the self-titled album, of course, has April, which has got this very long, extended orchestral arrangement by John Lord. There's also Anthem from the Book of Taliesin, which has some orchestral stuff. So this represents the kind of two factions that were in the band throughout Mark One. On one hand, you've got Ritchie Blackmore pushing the heavy sound. You've also got John Lord pushing this orchestral sound. And at the end of the day, they kind of both have their shot. And Blackmore wins, obviously. This is a very, very cool project, but this is not what Deep Purple are known for. The other way that I look at this album is that it is it's almost like a John Lord solo project. It is John Lord that he produces the score for the orchestra. I think he's very much in charge of the band at this point for the group elements. Essentially it's John Lord just using Deep Purple as the band to apply to this orchestral project. But you got to give John Lord credit. Very, very ambitious man. And we don't really see that level of ambition with John Lord really ever again after this and the Gemini Suite, which I can, I'll mention again as we go chronologically through this period. But yeah, John Lord's a very ambitious guy, and I mean, this is the concert itself was September of 1969. And it's so typical of that era. I mean, remember, these are the early days of prog, right? So I mean, at this point, King Crimson is touring around the UK. Whether or not the guys in purple would have seen Crimson or not, it's hard to say. I'm sure at some point one of them would have seen them in the early Crimson days. But this is the early proggy days. So there's a great exchange of ideas and concepts, and genres are being messed around with. But this is particularly unique in that John Lord seems to be doing it in reverse. So if you think of the classic prog bands, let's use Yes as an example. They're essentially a rock band who are bringing in elements from these other kind of supposedly highbrow music forms. So they're bringing classical to rock, they're bringing jazz to rock, they're bringing all of these influences, but they're bringing that to the rock world. John Lord does it backwards in that he is approaching the so-called highbrow artsy people in the classical world, and he's bringing rock to the classical arena, which is, I can't think of any other examples where that's done, really. This is also one of the first times that we get like a true collaboration between, a heavy rock band and an orchestra. It's not the first. I think Keith Emerson's band, The Nice, probably did it first. I think the Moody Blues had some orchestral stuff, but as a project and a concept of its own, I think this is still very, very unique. And it's, you know, it's pretty good. You know, I'm not sure if it's exactly my taste. You know, I think, you know, as far as the proggy stuff of this era goes, I think I do tend to lean more towards like the specifically rocky elements. But it's very cool and extremely ambitious and very very well written. Even though we kind of get the idea that this was, you know, like I said, this is kind of in the way of the band. The band wants to do this heavy thing, but you know, they gotta make sure that John Lord has his opportunity to express himself through this nifty orchestral thing. So as a piece itself, it's divided into three movements. You know, I will admit I know this one a little bit less than the other kind of classic Deep Purple stuff, but the three movements are really really great. I think I like the first movement the most. Um, it's got some really really great themes. I just love the dun 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 dun. Um, bum 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 bum. It's yeah, even the orchestral stuff. I think it's pretty standard contemporary classical music for the time, but it does have a bit of an edge to it. And the first movement is, you know, the idea is explicitly stated in the liner notes to the original album is the orchestra and the band are sort of fighting for dominance over the main theme. They're sort of seen as adversaries, and they don't integrate as much in the first movement. You know, the orchestra has, you know, a few minutes, and then the band has a few minutes. They kind of go back and forth. But I think the first movement has the most memorable moments that really stick with me, like particularly those two main themes that I brought up. I really like when the band first kicks in and we get those big chords. Like that's one moment where they are playing with the orchestra and you get that big dun dun dun, very triumphant, very intense. When the band does kick in for the first burst, we get a ridiculously great Richie Blackmore guitar solo. That's really notable for this album. I think we really see Blackmore's solo style pretty much fully formed. It sounds different because it's not in the context that we're used to hearing it. You know, even though there's sections on, you know, there's sections where the band is just playing. They're not playing like they would, um, you know, on the road when they're playing the in rock stuff at just your regular venues. It is still kind of a specialized way of playing that they're doing. Obviously, they got to be in tandem with the orchestra, so they can't go completely ape shit like they did, like they would do at other concerts. But there's other great moments in that first movement that I really like. You know, obviously Blackmore gets his big cadenza where it's just a proper guitar solo. It's just him by himself. When that kind of wraps up, I really like how the orchestra very, you know, menacingly churns back in. I think that's really really cool. Yeah, it is quite nifty. We get the second movement. This is kind of based around two, you know, kind of tunes. This is the only moment where Ian Gillan gets any action on this recording. And I will say the two like little verses that Gillan sings are fantastic. You know, again, this is, you know, he's not screaming or anything. He's not doing the kind of wilder vocal styles that he would do later. And we can really hear and appreciate how rich the tone of his voice is. Yeah, I think he's like what 21, 22 at this time, so he's in you know pristine form, is as pure as his voice is gonna get. Because you know once they really start touring, you know I think he wears himself out pretty quick, I would think. But the vocal passages on here are really really cool. I find it very funny how Ian Gillan apparently he wrote the lyrics the day of the event, which kind of goes to show that. You know, the rest of the band was going along with John Lord at this point, but yeah, that's all good. Then the third movement, this is kind of like the idea where it's like a big, sort of a big finale, so that the orchestra and the band are much more integrated at this point. We got a big drum solo in the third movement, which is neat. I like how it starts out. Ian Pace reprises the Chasing Shadows drum part, so he's doing that double paradiddle. That's pretty cool. And yeah, that is kind of it. It's a strange thing because obviously, you know, not this is not what Deep Purple is known for, but you know, they did it, and notable that they actually got pretty decent publicity in the UK with when this came out. Obviously, this was recorded at the Royal Albert Hall, so very very nice venue, and kind of for the first time, people started to like learn who Deep Purple was in the UK because they released the albums and they did, you know, sporadic touring in the Mark 1 days, but you know when by the time Gillan and Glover come in, it's not that much different from a brand new band as far as the UK and Europe's concerned, because so few people had bought the records or seen them live. So, um, in many ways, this is the first time that they develop a um, that a public awareness of the band is developed. And how funny it is how quickly this would be eclipsed by the follow up, or not really the follow up album, but the next album that comes out, which is, of course, In Rock. So obviously, the Concerto is John Lord's opportunity to pursue his classical ambitions, and In Rock represents Richie's ambition to be the heaviest band on the planet at the time. And I think he achieves it very, very well. I mean, what can you say about Deep Purple and Rock? It's almost hard to talk about it because it's so it's just such an archetypal album in terms of the development of metal. In fact, Lemmy from Motorhead, I think there's an interview where they ask Lemmy, they say, what's the first ever metal album? And he says In Rock. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call this to be explicitly metal per se, but I think I see where Lemmy's getting at. There's a reason why, he would pick In Rock over, say, like Paranoid or the self-titled Sabbath album, the first couple of Zeppelin albums. And I think the reason is that In Rock is just much more relentless. Obviously with Zeppelin, I mean, for the most part, it's very heavy blues, but there's always room for kind of a folky number. There's a little bit more dynamics with Zeppelin. Even Sabbath, the first album is very, very bluesy. And, Paranoid, yeah, it is, it's certainly much more of, that classic, sort of metal sound. But, Paranoid is pretty much the blueprint for a lot of metal music, let's be real. But it still has Planet Caravan. It still has that kind of little lull in the middle, which I love. Planet Caravan's a great song. But within Rock, it's just relentless. It is turned up to 11 the entire time, all the way through. The only exception is possibly like the couple of quiet moments in Child in Time, but they don't really last that long before it goes into that, just absolutely balls out, relentless rock and roll. And that's really what this is, and I think that's what sets it apart. I find this is much more exciting than the other Zeppelin Sabbath albums, because it's so fast paced. It's so energetic. You can just tell that the band is absolutely on fire. And this is probably the only album that this particular lineup put together where they were genuinely harmonious. I think they were genuinely all buddies at this time. John Lord has mentioned that in the early days that Blackmore and Gillan actually they would stay in the same hotel room. They were hotel buddies. So obviously Richie Blackmore and Ian Gillan are famous for not getting along very well. But at this point in time, I think they were in sync with one another, and I think that certainly reflects on the album. But yeah, Blackmore is obviously the major catalyst for this. He's the one that's been pushing this for a little while, and now that they've got a singer who's fully capable of it, and the rest of the band is fully on board, and they absolutely steamroll through everything that they had done before. Like I say, they eclipse the Concerto pretty quickly with this, and I could only imagine like what the live shows would have been like leading up to this, because this album it was recorded in studios, but the material was developed on the road, and this is kind of going right back to those early rehearsals in July of '69. The album comes out in June, and all of that, working the material on the road allowed the material to develop a little bit, and I think that kind of translates to the album as a whole as well. I would argue that this is possibly the only Deep Purple album in the entire catalog, going right the way up to today, that it almost captures the sound of the band live, or at least they seem to be trying to capture the spirit and energy and intensity of their live performances. Like there's parts on here where you swear Blackmore is just smashing up his guitar in the studio floor. He would smash up his guitars on stage quite regularly after this, once they had the money once they could afford to smash up their equipment as much as they did. But yeah, the craziness on this album cannot be understated. It's super influential, I would say, as well. Like particularly with Gillan's vocal stylings. Like he's not doing that kind of traditional singing like we get on Hallelujah or the Concerto. We really get to see Gillan doing the screaming. He's really experimenting. I think it's very influential on the technique of screaming that becomes prevalent in metal, kind of in the '80s afterwards. Gillan doesn't scream like a metal singer would scream. It is more of I think he's more rooted in like the Little Richard tradition. But what I think what's so influential about Gillan's performance on this album is that he doesn't really care whether or not you can understand what he's singing, and that's kind of a hallmark of a lot of metal music right now. The first time you hear a lot of metal songs with screaming technique, it just sounds like totally distorted and stylized, and you have no idea what they're saying. I feel this kind of starts here, or that element in metal music can be traced to here. And of course, Blackmore's guitar playing is also tremendously influential. There's a few things on here that become kind of hallmarks of metal music. One thing that stands out, of course, is John Lord. I mean, this is a very heavy album, but the organ is still such an integral part. Even though Lord isn't necessarily influencing this album as much as he did, the Mark One stuff or the Concerto, his presence is still absolutely vital, and he's such a major part of the mix of the sound of the sound on this. Lots of great organ solos. Around this time is when John Lord wires his organ through the Marshall stack and overdrives it to compete with Ritchie, and we get that really, really intense organ sound, which is a hallmark of Deep Purple. Ian Pace's drumming is absolutely frenetic on this as well, which is cool, and Roger Glover does a fantastic job of kind of holding it all down and making it work, and I'm sure he contributes a few songwriting elements as well. So yeah, obviously a great album. We'll talk about the songs here. Try to be brief about it because I've been waffling away all about all this stuff. So the first song. Oh, I always do this. Before we talk about the songs, we'll bring up the album cover. I think this is a great concept for an album cover, but it has got a very shitty execution. The whole Mount Rushmore thing in rock, it's an easy to get joke, but it's this blue and the lettering just seems so budget. It's hard to say how much faith the record company had in them at this point. They probably didn't give them a huge budget, but yeah, great idea, poor execution, but it is still iconic. It is, this is one of those things, and even cheaper, it's the exact same cover on the back, so that's kind of funny. Now we'll get to the songs. So it opens with Speed King. This was originally called Kneel and Pray. This goes back to the summer of '69, one of the first things that they put together. And what a way to announce the album. I mentioned before, they've got the Deep Purple had a habit of like opening their albums with something really insane. I don't think they ever matched the intensity or the insanity of opening an album with Speed King. The actual intro, it's interesting. So I believe it's all the UK pressings have an extended intro before the song actually kicks in. Just kind of like this pensive organ, noisy stuff, and then kind of swirls into a frenzy, and then the song starts. With the US releases, it literally just starts with a snare hit on the count of four, and it's into the song immediately. We just got we put the needle down, and it just it's a little Miss Molly, and we're off to the races, so to speak. Great. This is kind of that influential vocal style that I was talking about. He's really wailing on here. I love the old '50s rock and roll lyrics. It's all kind of recycled from these classic songs. Ian Pace puts out a tremendous performance. You're right. You compare Pace's drumming on the first 3 Deep Purple albums with the drumming on here, and it's just crazy. I mean, he's playing fills at like Mach 3 at times. Very, very busy drumming, but it fits the spirit of that heaviness. It's not just about sounding heavy. It's also about playing in a frantic, sort of manic manner, and I think Pace absolutely nails it. The middle section is really, really good. Great bass line. We get that classic bit of exchange between Lord and Blackmore. Gillan joins in. There's kind of like the arrangement of the solo, that doom doo 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 doom doo 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 doo, and when Gillan comes in on that, just really exciting stuff. Rapid crescendo back into the verse, and it's a legendary song. Speed King is unreal. Not one that they play live too often these days, because I think it is a young man's song. You kind of need to have the youthful exuberance required to put this one together on stage. But yeah, classic bit of Deep Purple. One of the certainly one of the more well-known songs off the album. That leads us to Bloodsucker. Again, still, it doesn't let up. We kind of get that cool little intro riff. This is songs like this is where I bring up the kind of 50s rock and roll influence. I mean, I think that's another thing that sets Deep Purple apart from their contemporaries, is that they do play blues, but they're not rooted in blues. I think it's more of like a 50s rock thing, and I think that part of that is Ian Gillan's vocal style. That's definitely like a Little Richard thing, but even like just the way that a song like Bloodsucker chugs along, there's something about it that reminds me of 50s rock, but 50s rock on steroids. This is it's demonic 50s rock. But great vocal performance again, lots of great riffs. We get the interplay between Blackmore and Lord. I really like the solo section. That it goes into a completely different pattern there, which is really cool. Another great Ian Gillan moment when we leave the solo section and we go back to the verse, and he does like the real high screaming, and he's got this crazy weird delay and echo reverb on his voice, and you can't understand what he's saying. That's very much the sort of metal thing, and just really pushing his voice in a very satisfying way. Although he probably didn't, he did his voice in after a while. I kind of get that idea. That really rich tone didn't last for long, but he's always been a great singer. He still sounds good today. He knows how he knows what not to sing these days. We'll put it that way. But yeah, Bloodsucker is a great song, famously re-recorded with Steve Morse on the Abandon album many years later. But you can't beat the original. It's that's where that's at. Now, track 3 is Child in Time. Easily the most well-known song on this album. This is a very famous song. One of Deep Purple's most well-known songs, I would think. It is fantastic. It is based on a song called Bombay Calling. I think the band was called It's a Beautiful Day or something like that. I'm not too sure. I know I've heard it, years ago. Just out of curiosity, I wanted to hear it. And it is very similar, but Deep Purple make it their own very quick. This is the one moment of the album where we do kind of get a bit of levity. It's a bit, the opening verse is very quiet and calm. But ultimately, it's a big 10-minute sort of proggy thing. It doesn't take long for the song to wind up. We get these sort of serious verses about the Cold War, and then Gillan starts doing the screaming and the wailing, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. Great display of Gillan's voice, and then of course we get up into the big instrumental section. I love how it kind of switches into a double time shuffle. Possibly the closest to blues that we get on this album is that halftime shuffle part. And yeah, it's really good. Fantastic soloing by Ritchie. This is one of the classic moments in Deep Purple history. I really love the unison line towards the end of the solo section where we get Blackmore and Laura very intense, and this is what I mean about the album being relentless. I mean, once you think it can't get any more intense, and then there's another layer, and then there's another layer, and by the time Pacey starts, matching the rhythm to those 16th note triplets there, it just reaches this absolute apex and then stops immediately. Back to the beginning. We get those cool little organ solos, and they just repeat that same verse again, and then it winds its way up to another crescendo, and then that's the end of the song, and it is a magnificent piece. Great. It's a tremendous display for the entire band. I believe this is the first thing that Mark II did, actually, as far as like writing goes. I think Gillan has said that writing Child in Time was the first thing that he contributed to Deep Purple. So obviously that's pretty interesting stuff. Was there something else I was gonna say about Child in Time? Don't know. It might come to me. who knows? In any case, it's a classic thing. We should all enjoy and appreciate Child in Time. That's what I was gonna say. How it's the lyrics to it are very un-Gillen-y. You know, Gillen has this. He's got a certain persona, whether it's like put on or if it's just just who the guy is, but it's almost sardonic, not in a bad way. Like I don't mean to say that as a um, as a bad thing. I mean, it's meant to be a compliment, but like he seems to be the kind of guy, he doesn't take himself or the business that seriously. You know what I mean? It's you know, I think there's this underlying vibe about Gillen where he just seems like such a carefree guy, very nonchalant. But the seriousness of the lyrics in Child in Time is just not really his thing, even though he did write the lyrics. But yeah, kind of interesting. That was what I wanted to say about Child in Time. Anyway, we'll flip the record over and expose the very cheap album cover with the same cover on both sides. And we'll talk about side two. Side two opens with another longer song. This is Flight of the Rat. Really, really cool song, and this was never performed live. I think this was, just would have been obviously put together, possibly just in the studio. The rest of the stuff I think was kind of, tested on the road a little bit, but Flight of the Rat was not. This is again, very fast paced. It is long. It's almost 8 minutes long, but very, very fast paced, and there's almost like a punk-like energy to the song. I'm not sure how else to describe it. I mean, I'm not sure if it's just the guitar riff, but or just the nature of the playing, but it is it is energetic, very optimistic as well. It's a very happy song, to spread the word around. The rat is leaving town. Message is a song. The misery is gone. It's so happy, even though it's very heavy and very intense. There's a resounding element of joy. I love the ascending guitar line that comes in there. Yeah, got some great organ as well, and yeah, just a classic bit of Deep Purple, and one that I tend to forget about because there's just this one version of it. And I think it's a pretty well regarded song among fans. A lot of Deep Purple fans have good things to say about Flight of the Rat. Love the ending. The "Please stay away." That's really cool. Yeah, great song. That winds its way to the second song on side two, which is Into the Fire. Almost, while retaining the same level of heaviness and intensity of Flight of the Rat, in some senses it is kind of the opposite. This is a much slower, dirgier rocker where it's just this really slow tempo, but it's brutal and it's crunching and it's heavy. I love those the first verse that we get, or the riff in the verse where it's just that dun, 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 dun. It's like a giant walking or something like that. I almost wonder if they did see King Crimson in 1969, because the verse to Into the Fire does remind me a bit of the verse on 21st Century Schizoid Man. Just in terms of that, it's just hitting those quarter notes, and it's just this, brutally simplistic, in your face, sort of a stomping, dirging riff, and there seems to be some kind of similarity to it. But as a whole, the song is really great. It does continue the same kind of theme as the Speed King and Bloodsucker, and that we were just kind of given a heavy riff. There's some cool variations when the solos come in. This one did get a fair bit of live airplay back in the day. I think they played it with Steve Morse a fair bit as well, which is pretty cool. Yeah, not a full blown Deep Purple classic. You don't really see this one on compilations so much, but yeah, an essential little bit of Purple, if you ask me. Great song. The next song is Living Wreck. This is the only song that seems a little bit more laid back. I mean, it's still just as heavy. We're still very riff-based, but it's based on a much more kind of loosey-goosey groove compared to the other stuff. And that's just Pace's style. He's always got kind of a swingy style, but it translates a little bit differently on Living Wreck. This is probably my least, it's still a good song, don't get me wrong, but it's probably my least favorite on the album. I, always enjoy it when it comes on, but yeah, it's sort of all right. Some really cool organ swells on there. I like there's moments where Lord just kind of it's kind of got a cool little solo section to it as well. But yeah, Living Wreck is okay at best. But then we make our way to the final track on the album, Hard Lovin' Man. This is another one where I think it is just super, super influential, and this is very much, Richie who's pushing the influence on this one. Um, that riff is just so intense, and I'm sure Richie's not the first person to do those kind of chugs, that dun 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 dun, but the way that it's applied on this particular song, and I mean, it forms the basis of the entire song, really. I think that is super influential on metal. Just that riff as a whole. Ask Lars Ulrich. He's the biggest Deep Purple fan in the world, and he'll probably tell you the same thing. Like Hard Lovin' Man is. There would be no Metallica if there was no Hard Lovin' Man. You can really see the DNA of metal on a song like that. But the song itself is insane. There's one of those moments where they are going absolutely apeshit in the studio. Some of the organ chords that Lord is choosing there are just so brutal and so dissonant, and it's almost uncomfortable at times. But there's this relentless intensity about it coming from all members. Um, this is the moment where it sounds like Blackmore is just sitting in the studio booth by himself, just physically hitting or throwing his guitar around. Like this is the live Deep Purple experience attempted to be captured in a studio. um Lyrically, this is probably a little bit more the Gillan that we know and love. It is a bit deliberately knuckleheaded, but he's certainly self-aware that it's knuckleheaded. It's very, very, I think the lyrics are pretty silly. But yeah, it's an absolutely classic bit of early metal. This is the one song where I could see an argument being made for it being metal. Um, Not the whole album, obviously, but yeah, Hard Lovin' Man absolutely is an early metal track, 110%. And that is Deep Purple in rock, a very, very significant moment in Deep Purple's history and rock music history as a whole. Obviously, very worth noting, on the same day that In Rock is released, we also get the single Black Knight. Uh, Black Knight, it's funny. I mean, Speaking and Child in Time are the two real famous songs on the album itself, but Black Knight is certainly got more longevity in terms of live performance. Obviously, Ian Gillan can't do. It's not realistic for him to try and do a song like Child in Time these days. He hasn't done it for quite a while. Same with Speed King. Like I said, I feel playing that song is a young man's game. But Black Knight is an example of it's a classic bit of Deep Purple. I don't know if it's one of my all-time favorite songs, but it's pretty good. Much bluesier than the rest of the album. It was recorded after the album sessions. I think the record company. I'm not sure if they weren't able to determine what a single would be off of like the album track list. So they said, just go in the studio and write a single. And I think the story goes they basically all just got plastered and super drunk. That's why the lyrics are so silly. Black Knight, not right, don't feel so right. They're very, very they sound like they were written while they were drunk, while Gillan was drunk. The riff itself is taken from what's the guy? Is it Ricky Nielsen? The song was called Summertime, like a mid-60s song. The riff is very, very slightly different. The original version is doom boom ba doom boom ba doom boom ba doom ba doom boom ba doom boom ba doom boom ba, and then Blackmore just adds ba da 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 to make it a little more bluesy, and then that's that. And he has a riff. Also, in the I mentioned there's the Nick Simper interview that I listened to on the Deep Purple podcast, and Nick Simper actually says that back when he was in the band, he showed Richie Blackmore that riff, the Summertime riff or whatever, and Blackmore says, "Oh, we could use that." "Oh no, we can't do that. That's somebody else's song." And then again, that's kind of like a a little bit of salt in the wound for Nick Simper, really teaching Blackmore this riff, and then all of a sudden it's a big single in the charts. And I think Black Knight was the first single that really made an impact on the UK charts as well, so that's pretty significant and worth noting. I think it's a big thing live because the crowd sings along, no, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it's simple, kind of bluesy pop song, really. It's okay. There's better live versions, but never been one of my all-time favorites, but significant nonetheless. Anyway, as they continue on this intense touring cycle, they're touring the States, they're touring Europe, they're touring the UK, they're all over the place. And also worth noting is that in August of 1970, is it August? Maybe it's another point, but at some point in August of or at some point in sort of early to mid 1970, they performed the Concerto for Group and Orchestra a second time in Los Angeles with their respective orchestra. Um, Kind of interesting how that would have gone down in the States, because I'm pretty sure it was they performed it after In Rock came out, so all the American audiences are probably craving this super heavy band, and then they do the Concerto. I'm not sure how well known the Concerto was in the States at the time, but they did do it. Also in September of 1970, they do the Gemini Suite, which was John Lord's follow-up to the Concerto for Group and Orchestra. Full disclosure, I'm not familiar with the Gemini Suite. It wasn't. It was released eventually in the '90s, but I don't really know all that much about it, other than it was written and performed at least once. But anyway, after September of 1970, they kind of go back into the same pattern they did with In Rock, in that they're kind of testing material on the road and recording in the studio intermittently. And it's a long period of recording before they finally come up with the material that becomes Fireball. A long period of touring and recording, I should say. And yeah, I mentioned earlier, I alluded to this being one of my all-time favorite Deep Purple albums. Kind of controversial, I think, even amongst the band. I mean, Blackmore has famously not been a big fan of it. I think the other members are kind of lukewarm, and then Ian Gillan has stated that it's his favorite album. The reason that I like this album so much is that it shows the band experimenting. They're being playful. They're exploring. They're more adventurous. They've taken that established heavy sound that they lay the foundation to within rock, and they just start playing with it. There's it's probably it's easily the most experimental album that Deep Purple does, arguably until Perpendicular. Um, I also kind of get the sense that because this album is a lot more exploratory, we also get a lot more of Gillan's personality on this record. If Blackmore was sort of a dominating influence on In Rock, I don't think Ian Gillan is particularly dominating on this album, but we see his personality come through. That influence is much more clear on Fireball than it was on In Rock, I think. And perhaps that's just a thing, that doesn't suit Blackmore's taste. There's also the possibility that the success of In Rock went to Blackmore's head, and Blackmore wasn't too fond of, the new guy, Ian Gillan, kind of, stamping his, forcing his influence on the proceedings. Who knows? I wasn't there. I think for the most part, Blackmore and Gillan just have conflicting personalities. They're just not suited to function together, I guess. And the fact that they were touring as aggressively as they were, they never really got a break from each other as well. So if there's any little bit of resentment, it's going to build up pretty quickly, and it doesn't take too long after Fireball before they basically won't talk to each other anymore. I think they were still friends for the most part around this time, but I think there might be a seed somewhere in the Fireball recording era that grows into this sort of bitter discontentment that was shared by the both of them. But yeah, the album itself, like I say, very experimental, very exploratory, and I wanted to make that point about Perpendicular. It's almost like, they immediately tried doing this after they established the heavy sound. Blackmore says, no, we're gonna do this heavy thing. They go ahead with Machine Head, which is sort of a return to the In Rock thing, but it's a little bit more refined, probably. And then, basically, move from there on. Every time that Gillan and Blackmore are both in the band, I feel Blackmore is exerting more and more dominance, so they don't really have the opportunity to experiment with things and just play whatever comes to mind, really, until Perpendicular. So it's almost, I think Fireball and Perpendicular have that in common. I'm not sure how much that has been said amongst the fan base, but I kind of came to that realization not too long ago. But yeah. We'll talk about the album cover here. This is kind of it's almost like the reverse of in rock. I think this is a much better execution. Like the airbrushed, kind of paintings of the band is really cool, but it's a stupid idea. The fact that they're all in this fireball shooting out from the earth. Specifically, it appears to be they're coming from Antarctica, which is very strange. I'm not sure why that is, but yeah, I think it's a silly idea, but at least the art itself is at least a little bit better than in rock. It doesn't have that cheap sort of feel, but there you go. So we'll talk about the tracks. There's kind of an interesting elements to the track listing on this. There's different track listings depending on whether you're in the UK, in Europe, or the US. We'll kind of talk about that when we get to track 3. So it opens with the title track, Fireball. This to me is another immediate Deep Purple classic. This is such a good song. Very, very different from In Rock. It's not. I feel that it's very, very fast paced. We've got Ian Pace is playing with the double. I'm just laughing at myself. Fast paced and Ian Pace. Ha ha ha. Sorry. So Ian Pace is playing with a double bass drum. I think this is the only case, the only example where he does that, and I think that's obviously pretty influential in terms of metal drumming. It's not something that Pacey sticks with, but especially the fact that it's the very intro. We get the sound of the air conditioner being turned on, and then we get this double bass drum pattern, and it's really, really cool. He's still playing with that swingy feel, and then it launches us into the main part of the song, which, like I said, is a little bit less heavy than In Rock. This is almost like bluegrass on steroids. And I mean that in a very complimentary way. I really, really like it. Great vocal performance from Gillan. There's a bit of screaming on it. He doesn't scream as much on this album as he does on In Rock, which is kind of interesting. But I think he delivers a great performance on Fireball. There's a pretty cool little middle 8 section. It's pretty arranged, and it's a little proggy, right? This whole album is kind of the closest that Purple comes to prog until many, many, many years later. And yeah, Fireball is a great track, great organ solo. The whole song kind of stops and breaks down, and makes its way back up with Lord kind of putting together this cool little moment, and yeah, very, very, very good song. This was played a little bit. Most of the songs on this album got almost zero live airplay. I think they were played live as they were developing the songs. Once the album was released, all but one were pretty much cast aside all the way up until the 90s when Blackmore wasn't in the band anymore. But yeah, Fireball is good, the title track. The second song, No, No, No. Another really, really good song. Again, very different from In Rock. It's still heavy, but it's much more funky. I really love Blackmore's picking on this song. I think it's really, really cool. Like I said, funky. I can't imagine. I think I can see why Blackmore wasn't as big a fan, because he wants things to be so riff based and very direct. In Rock is comparatively very simple album. In Rock is far simpler than a lot of the music that's on the first 3 albums, actually, and that's part of what Blackmore's aim was to create something direct, simple, and brutal. That's kind of the idea. Whereas this is a little bit less of all those 3. But No, No, No is great. Great vocal performance from Gillan. I think he does a really, really good job. He's not screaming in the higher register so much. It's more of like kind of like a guttural sort of technique that he's using. I really love the solo sections. The bass line under the guitar solo was really good. I love that boom ba doom boom boom ba doom doom. Really, really cool. The organ solo towards the end is just such a classic example of John Lord's exquisite taste. Really good stuff. Yeah, just on the whole is a great song. There's a section of the organ solo which is taken from an outtake from this album, which I'll talk about in a bit. And that outtake is possibly one of my all-time favorite Deep Purple songs. Controversial, but like I said, we'll talk about the outtakes in a bit. So track three, this is different depending on what version of the album you have. This particular old vinyl copy is a U.S. release, so we get "Strange Kind of Woman" on here. This is the one song from this album that had longevity live through pretty much every single era afterwards, minus like Marks 3 and 4. But "Strange Kind of Woman" is absolutely, it's a Mark II classic. Um, in the UK, this was released as a standalone single, kind of like Black Knight was to In Rock. And really, it's honestly pretty similar to Black Knight. Really, this is the kind of funny song about falling in love with a prostitute. Um, but it is that kind of bluesy pop thing, just like Black Knight is. Really, bum, dum, bum, dum, 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 dum. It's kind of got that quirky shuffle to it. I think this is a little bit more elaborate than Black Knight. I do like the little middle eight that we get where Gillan does the little falsetto bit. That's really nice. Live, this would be a fantastic moment where Blackmore and Gillan would be kind of trading the little vocal and guitar licks, which is really really cool. And they did that even into the '90s when they really hated each other. They would still do that on the Strange Kind of Woman part of the set. So. Yeah, it's a good song. I find it very comparable to Black Knight, to be honest, but that's okay. These are the singles, right? And yeah, for if you were in the UK or Europe in 19 what am I saying? If you're if you're in the UK or Europe, the third track was Demon's Eye. Kind of interesting because this is also a bluesier number, although I think Demon's Eye is a little less poppy than Strange Kind of Woman. Not sure which I like better between the two. I really love the organ on Demon's Eye. That intro is very very intense, and it's got a great bluesy guitar riff. Yeah, it's a great piece. I think the organ is the real highlight there. Um, yeah, it is a great piece. It's probably not one of my favorite Deep Purple songs of all time, but then neither is Strange Kind of Woman or Black Knight. So that kind of bluesy thing doesn't always grab me with Purple that certain other bands does, but it's all quite good. All quite good fun at the end of the day. Speaking of good fun, the fourth track on the first side is one of my guilty pleasures. Anyone's Daughter. Possibly one of the, this is almost certainly one of the silliest songs that Deep Purple ever recorded. This is very much just kind of like light country and western sort of a thing. It's very, very jokey. It's pretty long. It's funny how it's almost a 5-minute song. There's almost a minute worth of just kind of random studio sounds and noodling around and that. But it's just great, and this is an example of where I really see Ian Gillan's influence coming in. The lyrics that he puts together for this are absolutely hilarious. The whole trope of trying to get with the girl and getting rejected and abused by their fathers. Every girl he gets with, he gets abused by their respective dad, which is quite funny. And everything all works out in the end because he finally marries a rich man's daughter. There's a great line too that always gives me a laugh. Is your father says I'm dumb and straggy, but this dumb and straggy is your daughter's baby's daddy. I always laugh at that. That's such a Gillan thing. This is where we can kind of see that sort of sardonic quality that Gillan has. There's almost like I don't know. The sardonic is the best word that I can describe. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not the perfect description, but I think it fits. There's some great little ad libs that Gillan puts in there as well. Like it was nice, and well, what do you think of that? Stuff like that is quite fun. It's very representative of his style and personality. So then after that little bit of fun, we flip the record over and we get what I would consider possibly the best side in Deep Purple history. That might be controversial. No, I think side 2 of Fireball is the greatest side in Deep Purple. At least their vinyl output. It opens with The Mule. I was wrong actually. This is the only other song that got a lot of live renditions because of course this was the vehicle for Ian Pace's drum solo. And it's a great opportunity to do it. The the song is really built around this march where he's kind of alternating between the snare and the toms. Um, and it's really really good. It almost has some Eastern flavor on this. Like Blackmore is soloing over these Eastern scales, which is really cool. It gives the song a very mystical quality, um, very ethereal at times, but still quite heavy. Gillan puts together a really nice short verse, very very quiet, but again, it adds to that mystic quality. I love how the middle of the song just randomly goes into this crazy little funky jam out of nowhere. Um, and it doesn't it lasts like what, like 15 seconds, and then it goes back into that mystic march, which is really really cool. There's some great John Lord work on here, and yeah, the mule is great live version on Made in Japan, of course. And I think this was really only done in like 70s Mark too. When they got back together in the 80s, I don't think they ever did it again, which is a shame because it's very very cool. A very cool mule. And anyway, the second song on this wonderful side is Fools. Now talk about Purple kind of going in a proggy direction. I mean, if the mule wasn't enough with all that Eastern influence that they were putting in here, this is the closest Deep Purple come to putting like a full blown prog epic onto an album. I think it's fair to say that Fools was probably the conscious attempt to follow up Child in Time. Um, I think, if I really like Fools. Don't get me wrong, but I kind of get the idea that this it's a little bit contrived. I think Child in Time comes together very naturally. That represents the some of the earliest rehearsals and writing sessions that the band undertook. And with Fools, it seems like they might be trying just a little bit too hard to make something big and profound or whatever. But it's still very very good. I love the intro. It's very pensive. Um, it's almost kind of got this lurking quality. And then we get the main riff with the verses, and it's great because it's so heavy, but it's also sort of laid back as well. It's this crunching riff, but it's Pacey's drumming. It's that swing style that he applies to it, which gives it a very distinctive character. Gillan turns out a tremendous vocal performance. Again, he's not doing the high register screaming on this. He's definitely focused more on that kind of lower guttural style. But there's so many moments on here that are just so Ian Gillan. There's a couple of moments where you kind of hear like he's kind of like laughing almost sarcastically as he's singing, which is really cool. Yeah, it's just a great track. We get that first heavy verse kind of winds down with Pacey kind of like taking the lead for a bit. A second verse shoots up out of nowhere, kind of smacks you in the face. And then we get the long extended solo section in the middle, which is really just Blackmore's opportunity to do some volume swell stuff to give the guitar a cello sort of effect, which is very, very cool. And then again, we get that heavy verse comes back again, and the song eventually winds up. And I didn't mean to sound too critical of it. I think it's fair to say that it was a deliberate attempt to do a Child in Time again, but it's still a fantastic song. I'm a huge fan of Fools. And then that brings us to the final track on the album, which is another one of my favorites. I absolutely love it. No One Came. This is another very Gillan-y sort of a number. This is again that sarcastic, sort of sardonic, taking the piss out of everything, sort of attitude and persona of Gillan is so on display on this song. This is definitely his baby. It's almost the Court of the Winton King guy is Kevin. He calls it a Gillan rap, and that's probably fair to say. But it's very heavy. The bass tone that they get on that is fantastic. And then once Pacey kicks in and the bass drum locks in with the bass guitar, oh, it's just so heavy. Just boom, 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 boom. Really, really cool. Very funky as well. When I was a kid, I remember listening to this song, and one of my all-time favorite drum fills is on this. It comes up at the first chorus, and it's just this and as a young drummer, I would as young immature drummers always do, you always try to like find a way to force your favorite drum stuff into a song. I would always find a way to play that fill. Which is, like I say, that's what inexperienced drummers do. I've become much more tasteful in my playing, I should hope, since then. But the whole band delivers a tremendous performance. Great guitar solo by Blackmore. And again, we see that kind of experimentation, especially towards the end of the song where we get the backwards piano solo. I think that's really, really cool. Um, yeah, very simple song. I mean, it doesn't really deviate too much from that basic bass rhythm, but it's really good. And again, a great showcase for Gillan's kind of sassy attitude and great vocal performance as well. And that wraps up what is quite likely my all-time favorite Deep Purple album. I feel that that's not super common, but I'm sure there's a lot of good Fireball lovers out there. Probably amongst the few folks that enjoy this channel because this is more of a proggy channel, and I've always thought Fireball is one of the more proggy Deep Purple albums. So yeah, there you have it. I think eventually pretty much all the songs on this song would be played live, but not until Steve Morse joins the band in the 90s because Blackmore. I assume it's Blackmore's the one that's saying, no, we're not playing this album because I think it's shit. That seems like the sort of thing that Blackmore would do. But it seems bizarre to me because there is a lot of other material that's recorded around this time that does not appear on the actual album. There's a lot of outtakes on this. I probably should have mentioned too. There's an outtake from In Rock. To briefly go back to In Rock is the song "Cry Free," which is a really, really cool song. I think I can see why they left it off of In Rock. I mentioned before In Rock is a very simple and driving album, where the song "Cry Free" is probably the arrangement is a little bit too busy, and I can see why that wouldn't have fit. But the outtakes from the Fireball era, I feel any of them could fit on there somehow or another. The one that did get some degree of release, it was the B-side to the Strange Kind of Woman single, was a song called I'm Alone, which is fantastic. Very, very fast-paced, almost got a bit of a Latin feel. Great showcase for Roger Glover, where he's doing that kind of Latin groove. But got a great hook, I'm alone, so alone, and I feel like going home. Great hook, very fast paced, very fun. Again, this was played live after Blackmore left the band. The odd time they put this song into the set list, but very underrated and pretty obscure, being considering it was only a B-side. But of the Fireball outtakes, I'm Alone is probably the least obscure because there's at least two other songs that didn't get any release at all until the 25th anniversary edition that came out on CD. The first of which is a song called Freedom. This is a really good song. You're very bouncy, one of those happy, super optimistic songs. I get that 50s rock and roll vibe from it. Boom, 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 dun, 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 dun. And it's cool, I wouldn't, this is one where I guess I could kind of see why it didn't match up to the same quality as the other material on Fireball. But what is notable is I'm pretty sure Freedom has the highest note that Ian Gillan has ever hit on record. I think it is. It's the very last verse where he sings the entire last verse in that very, very high register. But when he actually sings the title and he goes, "Freedom!" It's insane how high he gets his voice to go. I mean, that's full voice. That's not falsetto. And it's so insane that it's like as much as I wouldn't want to believe it, if I found out that was speeding up the tape to achieve that note, I'd be disappointed, but I'd be like, yeah, that's fair enough. But then it's more than likely he just did sing it again. He was a young man at the time. I'm sure he was capable of doing it, and being in that studio setting, yeah, he may well have achieved it. Not the kind of thing that I think he would have wanted to do live all the time to hit that high note in Freedom, but very, very cool stuff. That's the high note's the most noteworthy part of that song, I think. Otherwise, it's kind of a fun, bouncy little number. But the last outtake from this album, this is the possible controversial moment. I would say if at the very least this song is in my top 3 favorite Deep Purple songs ever. It might even be my all-time favorite Deep Purple song, and it was never released on an album. It should have been on Fireball, and the song in question is Slow Train. This song is absolutely fantastic. Everyone always points to Rush as being like, the developers of prog metal, and of course they are. But if Deep Purple put Slow Train on Fireball, I feel that would have been you could have traced the roots back a little bit further, because Slow Train's a very, very heavy song, but it's also totally all over the place. There's lots of cool tempo shifts. It's got lots of different sections to it. Um, it's heavy, it's groovy, it's got some hooks to it, it's got the real kind of majestic part to it. It's got it all. It is such a good song, and I have no idea. I resent the fact that this was never really properly released until the 25th anniversary of Fireball comes out. It's just like an obscure, bonus track. That main riff, the intro is so good. That's the section that I think that is incorporated into John Lord's organ solo on No No No. I'm pretty sure it's a variation of that. I think that solo bit comes from the opening riff of Slow Train. We got those kind of fast-paced verses, again, that 50s rock and roll style. I know, but I can't think of the lyrics right now, but those parts are really, really good. There's also kind of a fast snare-led section that almost reminds me of Ballroom Blitz. Again, Gillan just killing it on the vocals. It sounds so good. My favorite part of the song, though, is sort of the majestic bit, where they just drone on these chords, just boom, 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 and then Gillan sings this amazing line over top of it. It's not like a line. There's no lyrics to it, but just that. That is such an amazing part. It's so good. Deep Purple doesn't. There's nothing else like that in their catalog. And it's just such a shame that was not released. I'm really dwelling on this point because Slow Train is one of their greatest accomplishments. That section, that majestic section, da na 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 na, that's actually Blackmore ends up using that many years down the line, like 12 years down the line, on the Rainbow album Bent Out of Shape. The song is Make Your Move. This is the Joe Lynn Turner era of Rainbow, and there is a section where Blackmore just plays the guitar part to that melody, but it's in the context of a song like Make Your Move, I don't think it's quite as good. It probably elevates that song a little bit, but no, the real deal is where Gillan just sings that melody, and then we go back into the actual main part of the song. Gonna ride the slow train, baby, take all the whistle stops. So yes, we are. It's so good. There's a great solo section in it as well. We get the classic Blackmore Lord thing, trading solos back and forth, and it winds its way back into that. It's a perfect song. It's a perfect song. Maybe like the hard rock purists might find it's a little bit too busy. That's probably a fair criticism, but like I said, I'm a prog-centric guy, so when Deep Purple does stuff like Slow Train, it's amazing. And yeah, I think that covers this particular chunk of Deep Purple history. This is Deep Purple from 1969 to 1971. So stay tuned next time. I appreciate if you've made it this far in the video. The next one will cover Machine Head, Made in Japan, and Who Do We Think We Are. So, as ever, thank you so much for watching and listening. I never said this because I'm not a conformist, but if you did like it, like, comment, and subscribe, blah, 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 blah. I feel obligated to say that, but then that's why I always say I don't say it, because, I don't know, this is my weird attempt at humor. But I should wrap this up because my brain is fried. I've been talking for probably too long. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned. You'll see more in the future. Take care.